The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Nakamura estate, casting a soft glow on the perfectly curated world of Kaito Nakamura. The air was still, save for the faint rustle of servants preparing the day's breakfast. Everything in the house radiated an aura of meticulous perfection, precisely as his father, Hiroshi Nakamura, demanded. For Kaito, it was suffocating. Kaito sat at the long, lacquered dining table, his posture immaculate as he sipped his tea. His movements were deliberate, his demeanor composed, a mirror of the discipline drilled into him since childhood. Across from him, Hiroshi Nakamura read the financial reports with the same stoic intensity that had built the Nakamura Zaibatsu into one of the most powerful conglomerates in Japan. Kaito, Hiroshi's voice cut through the silence, steady and commanding. The board meeting is at 2. Ensure you're prepared to present your quarterly analysis. This is an important step in solidifying your position as my successor. Yes, father, Kaito replied, his voice devoid of emotion, as if reciting lines from a script. Hiroshi barely glanced up. For him, Kaito was not a son, but a legacy, a vessel to carry the Nakamura name into the future. Kaito had always understood this, but understanding didn't make it easier to accept. The weight of his father's expectations was like a boulder chained to his back, crushing any semblance of individuality. As Hiroshi rose to leave, his words lingered like a shadow. Perfection is not a choice, Kaito. It is a necessity. Don't forget that. After breakfast, Kaito retreated to his office, a room filled with sleek furniture and shelves lined with books on economics, business strategy, and global markets. He stared at the screen of his laptop, the presentation for the afternoon meeting open but untouched. His mind wandered, as it often did, to thoughts of a different life, a life where he wasn't defined by his last name, where he could pursue his love for traditional Japanese calligraphy without ridicule, where he could explore the streets of Kyoto without a security detail, where he could fall in love without calculating the societal impact. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he said, his tone polite but distant. It was Mariko, the family's trusted housekeeper. She had been with the Nakamuras for decades and was one of the few people Kaito trusted. "Young master, you seem troubled today," she said, her voice gentle but knowing. "I'm fine, Mariko," Kaito replied, forcing a small smile. "Just the usual demands." Mariko nodded but didn't leave. "Your father is a hard man, Kaito. But remember, even the strongest stone can crack under pressure. Don't let him take away who you are." Her words struck a chord, but Kaito only nodded. He had heard similar sentiments before, yet they felt impossible to act on. Who was he outside of his father's shadow? The answer eluded him. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Kaito attended yet another formal dinner, this time hosted by a potential business partner. The grand ballroom was filled with elites, CEOs, politicians, and socialites, all vying for Hiroshi Nakamura's favor. Kaito stood by his father's side, every movement and word calculated to maintain the family's pristine image. "Your son is a remarkable young man," one guest remarked to Hiroshi, glancing at Kaito with admiration. "He will surely lead the Nakamura Zaibatsu to even greater heights." Hiroshi nodded, his pride thinly veiled. Kaito understands the importance of duty. He was born to lead. Kaito offered a polite smile, but inside he felt hollow. Born to lead, born to sacrifice, born to be a pawn in his father's game. The words echoed in his mind as he excused himself to the balcony, desperate for a moment of solitude. The cool night air was a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. Kaito leaned on the railing, staring out at the city lights. Tokyo stretched before him, a sea of endless possibilities, a life teeming with vibrancy and freedom. Yet here he was, trapped in a gilded cage, every decision made for him, every step predetermined. His thoughts turned to the future his father envisioned, a marriage of convenience to a woman chosen for her family's status, a life devoted entirely to the Nakamura empire. The idea of it made his chest tighten. He didn't want a trophy wife who would smile for the cameras and bear his children out of obligation. He wanted love, real, raw, and uncalculated. He wanted to marry someone who saw him not as Kaito Nakamura, heir to a fortune, but as Kaito, a man with dreams, flaws, and a heart yearning for connection. As the evening wore on, Kaito returned to the ballroom, masking his turmoil behind a facade of calm. But deep down, he knew something had to change. He couldn't continue living like this, suffocated by expectations and deprived of his own identity. The desire for freedom burned within him, stronger than ever before. Little did he know, fate was already at work. The winds of change were about to blow into his carefully constructed world, bringing with them a force that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, duty, and himself. For Simisola, coming to Japan was more than just a dream. It was a calling. Her late grandmother, Yumi, had been half Japanese, born to a Japanese father and a Nigerian mother during a time when such unions were rare and frowned upon. Yumi had left Japan in her youth, carrying with her a blend of cultures that she passed down to her children and, eventually, to Simisola. Growing up, Simisola had listened to her grandmother's stories with wide-eyed fascination. Yumi spoke of serene tea gardens, bustling markets, and summers spent beneath the shade of sakura trees. But her stories often ended with a wistful sigh and a faraway look, as though Japan were a part of her soul she could never reclaim. Now, standing on Japanese soil, Simisola felt that same connection. It was as if her grandmother's spirit were guiding her, whispering through the rustle of leaves and the hum of the city. Yet, beneath her excitement lay a quiet fear. She wasn't here to sightsee, she was here to uncover her family's history, a history that might hold painful truths. Simisola's first day in Tokyo was a whirlwind. She checked into a modest guest house in a quiet neighborhood, her room overlooking a narrow street lined with traditional wooden houses. The tatami mats and paper sliding doors felt like stepping into another era, and she couldn't help but smile as she traced her fingers along the delicate patterns of the shoji. "Simisola-san, welcome," her host, a kind elderly woman named Noriko, said in broken English. "If you need anything, please ask." "Thank you, Noriko-san," Simisola replied, bowing politely. Her Japanese was basic, but she had spent months practicing phrases and studying cultural norms. Still, being here was different. It was real. Later that evening, she wandered through the streets, her vibrant energy drawing curious glances and friendly smiles. She found herself in a small ramen shop, its red lanterns glowing warmly in the twilight. The owner, a gruff but kind man, seemed delighted by her curiosity. "First time in Japan?" he asked, serving her a steaming bowl of tonkotsu ramen. "Yes," she replied, her smile lighting up the dimly lit space. "And it's everything I dreamed it would be." As she savored the rich broth, Simisola felt a flicker of belonging. It wasn't just the food or the sights. It was the sense of being part of something larger, of walking in her grandmother's footsteps. The next morning, Simisola set out to explore the city with a map in hand and determination in her heart. Her destination was a small archive tucked away in the Asakusa district. It was here, she hoped, that she might find records of her grandmother's family, a name, an address, something to bridge the gap between past and present. The streets of Asakusa were alive with the scent of incense from Sensoji Temple and the chatter of tourists and shopkeepers. Simisola paused to take a photo of the temple's towering pagoda, its vibrant colors standing against the clear blue sky. She felt a pang of awe and reverence as she walked through the temple grounds, imagining her grandmother doing the same many decades ago. Finally, she arrived at the archive, a quaint building with shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly. The clerk, an elderly man with a kind smile, listened patiently as she explained her search. "My grandmother was born here," Simasola said, showing him a faded photograph of Yumi as a young girl. "Her father was Japanese, but we don't know much more than that." The man examined the photo carefully. "This will take some time," he said, "but we'll do our best to help you." As Simasola waited, her heart raced with anticipation and fear. What if she found nothing? What if she uncovered something she wasn't prepared for? She clenched her hands tightly, the weight of her journey pressing down on her. This was more than a search for records. It was a search for identity, for belonging, for the pieces of herself she had never truly understood. That evening, as Simasola walked back to her guest house, she found herself drawn to a quiet park. The sakura trees were in full bloom, their petals cascading like snow in the gentle breeze. She sat on a bench beneath one of the trees, her satchel resting at her feet. The tranquility of the moment was a stark contrast to the bustling city around her. It was here, lost in thought, that she first saw him. Kaito Nakamura stood at a distance, his tall figure silhouetted against the fading light. He was dressed impeccably, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the casual joggers and families nearby. There was something about him, an aura of quiet strength and unspoken sadness. He seemed out of place, much like herself. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed to be still. Simasola felt a jolt of something she couldn't explain, a spark, a pull as if the universe had orchestrated this moment. Kaito hesitated, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the park. Simasola watched him go, her heart pounding. She didn't know who he was or why she felt so drawn to him, but something told her this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed, and she was right. The Nakamura family's charity gala was an event of unmatched grandeur, the kind that brought Tokyo's elite together under one roof. Held in the sprawling ballroom of the Nakamura estate, it was a spectacle of opulence, with glittering chandeliers casting a golden glow over polished marble floors. A string quartet played a delicate melody as the city's most powerful figures mingled, their conversations laced with veiled competition and polite laughter. Dressed in a stunning yet simple emerald green gown, borrowed from her best friend Naomi, she clutched her sequined clutch like a lifeline. Her caramel brown skin glowed under the ambient light, her natural curls cascading down her shoulders in soft waves. Though her beauty turned heads, Simasola felt the weight of every gaze. These weren't her people, CEOs, diplomats, and celebrities. She was just an English teacher and a friend's +1, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was a misplaced puzzle piece in a meticulously curated image. "You'll be fine," Naomi whispered, giving her an encouraging nudge. Naomi had been invited as part of her role in a PR firm working with the Nakamura family. "Just stick with me and smile. No one's paying that much attention." But Simasola knew better. In a room like this, attention was currency, and her presence was like a ripple in still water. The evening progressed in a blur of polite introductions and endless trays of hors d'oeuvres. Simasola tried her best to blend in, offering smiles and small talk, while Naomi navigated her professional network. Despite her initial discomfort, she couldn't help but admire the breathtaking beauty of the Nakamura estate. Every corner of the ballroom was a testament to luxury: the hand-carved wood paneling, the silk drapery, and the delicate porcelain vases that stood as centerpieces on polished mahogany pedestals. It was one such vase that became her undoing. Lost in thought while admiring a particularly intricate design, Simasola took an unintentional step backward, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. She stumbled, reaching out to steady herself, and her hand grazed the pedestal. Time seemed to slow as the vase wobbled, teetering precariously before crashing to the floor in an explosion of porcelain shards. The room fell silent. Conversations halted mid-sentence as dozens of eyes turned toward her. Simasola's heart pounded in her chest, her face flushing with embarrassment. She crouched instinctively, trying to gather the broken pieces with trembling hands. I'm so sorry, she stammered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in her ears. I didn't mean to. Before she could finish, a pair of polished black shoes entered her line of vision. She looked up slowly, her breath catching as she met the eyes of Kaito Nakamura. Kaito stood tall and poised, his tailored navy suit fitting him with an elegance that seemed almost otherworldly. His dark eyes, sharp and calculating, assessed the scene before him. There was no anger in his expression, no trace of the icy authority she had expected from the heir to one of Japan's most powerful families. Instead, there was something else: curiosity, perhaps even amusement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, and Simasola felt her embarrassment deepen under his gaze. She was certain he would chastise her, demand she leave, or worse, make her feel even smaller than she already did. But then, to her surprise, his lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and calm, carrying a warmth that disarmed her. Simasola blinked, taken aback by his response. "No, I'm fine. She glanced at the shattered vase, her mortification returning in full force. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't paying attention. I'll pay for it. I swear." Kaito tilted his head, studying her with a quiet intensity. "Pay for it?" he repeated, as though the idea amused him. "Do you have any idea how much that vase cost?" Simasola felt her stomach drop. Of course, it was probably worth more than she could make in a year. She bit her lip, unsure of what to say. "Priceless," Kaito continued, crouching beside her and picking up one of the larger shards. "It was an antique, part of a collection passed down through my family." Her cheeks burned. "I'm so sorry," she said again, her voice trembling. Relax," Kaito interrupted, his tone light. He straightened and extended a hand to help her up. "It's just a vase. Things can be replaced." Simasola hesitated before taking his hand. His grip was firm yet gentle, and she felt a strange jolt of electricity at the contact. As she stood, she met his gaze once more, and for the first time, she noticed the faint softness beneath his otherwise composed exterior. He wasn't what she had expected, not cold, not intimidating. Instead, he seemed human. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" Kaito asked, a teasing glint in his eyes. "You're the one who gave everyone something interesting to talk about tonight." Simasola couldn't help but laugh nervously. "Well, I'm glad I could liven up your event." Kaito chuckled, a low, rich sound that sent a strange warmth through her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Simasola. Simasola James." "Kaito Nakamura," he said, though she had already known. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Simasola." Their exchange was brief, interrupted by a member of the Nakamura staff who arrived to clean up the mess. Kaito returned to his duties as host, but his mind lingered on the encounter. There was something about Simasola, her boldness in apologizing, her disarming authenticity, that intrigued him in a way he couldn't quite explain. She was unlike anyone he had met in his carefully curated world. As for Simasola, she spent the rest of the evening trying to fade into the background, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Kaito. His warmth, his unexpected kindness, it was enough to make her forget the humiliation of the broken vase. Little did they know, that fleeting moment was the beginning of something far greater. Their worlds had collided in the most unexpected way, and the ripples would soon transform both of their lives forever. For Kaito Nakamura, the days following the gala were unlike any he had known. His life, once dictated by strict schedules and suffocating formality began to change. It started with fleeting thoughts of Simisola James, the way she had laughed nervously after breaking the vase, the warmth in her eyes when she apologized, the way she carried herself with a mix of grace and vibrancy that stood out in his carefully curated world. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, and the memory of her lingered like the melody of a song he couldn't stop replaying. But it wasn't just memory. It was a pull, subtle at first, but growing stronger with each passing day. Kaido found himself seeking her out, crafting excuses to cross paths with her again. At first, it was small gestures, a call to Naomi's firm, ensuring that Simisola would be present at a follow-up event, or a polite inquiry about the English tutoring she had mentioned. It wasn't long before their accidental meetings became intentional. One crisp evening, Kaido found himself in Asakusa, a district he rarely visited despite its historical charm. It was uncharacteristic for him, a man whose every move was deliberate and calculated. Yet something about the vibrant streets had drawn him here. Or perhaps it was the knowledge that Simisola often wandered these very paths. As if guided by an unseen force, he spotted her among the crowd. She was standing before a street vendor, her dark curls catching the golden light of lanterns strung above. She held a delicate fan painted with cherry blossoms, her expression one of pure delight as she examined it. "Simisola!" Kaido called out, his voice carrying just enough warmth to make her turn. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Kaido, what are you doing here?" He hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the honesty in her gaze. "Exploring," he said simply, though they both knew it was only part of the truth. A smile spread across her face. "Well, you've come to the right place. Let me show you around." What followed was an evening unlike any Kaido had ever experienced. Simisola led him through the bustling street markets, introducing him to a world far removed from the gilded halls of the Nakamura estate. Vendors called out in cheerful voices, their stalls overflowing with vibrant wares, handcrafted trinkets, colorful yukata, skewers of sizzling yakitori, and sweet taiyaki shaped like fish. "Have you ever tried one of these?" Simisola asked, holding up a freshly made taiyaki filled with red bean paste. Kaido shook his head. "No, I can't say I have." "Then you're in for a treat." She handed him one, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "But be careful, it's hot." He bit into it cautiously, the warm, sweet filling surprising him. "It's good," he admitted, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "See? You've been missing out," she teased, her laughter light and infectious. From the markets, they wandered to a small shrine tucked away in a quiet corner. The air was cool and still, the faint scent of incense lingering. Simisola paused at the entrance, her expression softening as she gazed at the lantern-lit path. "This is one of my favorite places," she said quietly. "It's peaceful, feels like a step back in time." Kaido followed her gaze, his usual guarded demeanor giving way to something more vulnerable. "I don't think I've ever been here," he admitted. "I've spent so much time focused on the future, I've forgotten to look around me." Simisola glanced at him, her eyes searching his face. "It's never too late to start." Their connection deepened in the quiet moments that followed. Over the weeks, they began meeting more often, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes by design. What started as polite exchanges evolved into late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours. One evening, they sat in a modest ramen shop, the kind Kaido had never thought to step into before meeting Simisola. The air was filled with the comforting aroma of broth and noodles, the chatter of other patrons fading into the background as they spoke. "What was your dream, Kaido?" Simisola asked, her voice soft yet probing. "Before all the expectations and responsibilities, what did you want for yourself?" Kaido stared into his bowl, the steam curling upward like a veil. "I don't think I ever allowed myself to dream," he said finally. My path was chosen for me the moment I was born. I was told what to want, what to value, who to become. Simisola reached across the table, her hand brushing his lightly. That doesn't mean you can't start now, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. You deserve to live your own life, Kaido. Her words struck a chord, reverberating through the walls he had built around himself. In her presence, those walls seemed to crack, letting in light for the first time. Their bond was built on shared longings, hers for a deeper connection to her heritage, his for a life unshackled by duty. Together, they explored corners of Tokyo that felt like hidden treasures. They laughed over bowls of ramen, marveled at the beauty of cherry blossoms in full bloom, and found solace in the quiet of hidden shrines. Simisola saw a side of Kaido that no one else did. Beneath his stoic exterior was a man with a sharp wit and a surprisingly tender heart. And Kaido, in turn, was captivated by Simisola's authenticity. She was unguarded in a way he could never be, unafraid to speak her mind and show her emotions. One evening, as they stood on a bridge overlooking the Sumida River, Kaido turned to her, his voice low but steady. You've shown me a world I didn't know existed, Simisola. A world I didn't think I deserved to see. She smiled, her eyes shimmering in the moonlight. And you've reminded me that home isn't just a place, it's a feeling. Thank you for that. As their connection deepened, so did the unspoken tension between them. There were moments when their eyes lingered too long, when their laughter quieted into something more intimate, when the space between them felt charged with possibilities. But neither spoke of it, not yet. Kaido was a man bound by duty, and Simisola was a woman finding her place in a foreign land. Yet, in each other, they had found something rare and precious, an understanding, a kindred spirit, a glimpse of what life could be if only they were brave enough to seize it. For now, they walked the line between friendship and something more, their growing connection like a thread weaving their fates together. But both knew that threads, no matter how strong, could be tested, and that their bond would soon face challenges neither of them could foresee. Kaido Nakamura had always been the epitome of composure. In the pristine boardrooms of Tokyo's towering skyscrapers, his words were measured, his demeanor unshakable. The Nakamura Zaibatsu thrived on his precision, his unwavering commitment to upholding the family's legacy. But lately, that foundation had begun to crack. No matter how many charts and reports filled his desk, no matter how meticulously his assistants prepared for the day's meetings, one thought dominated Kaido's mind: Simisola James. She had consumed him entirely. Her laughter rang in his ears during even the quietest moments, and the memory of her touch, a fleeting brush of fingers, an accidental bump, sent a shiver through him that no amount of self-control could suppress. Her face haunted him, her smile a beacon of warmth in the cold, sterile corridors of his world, and it was driving him mad. The cracks in Kaido's armor became more apparent with each passing day. His assistants whispered in hushed tones about his distraction, the way he stared out the window during meetings, his hand absent-mindedly tapping against his pen. Even his father Hiroshi had noticed. "Kaito," Hiroshi said during one particularly grueling meeting, his tone sharp and biting. "If you cannot focus on the task at hand, then perhaps you are not ready to lead." The reprimand stung, but it wasn't enough to break through the haze. Kaido barely heard the words, his thoughts drifting once again to Simisola, her vibrant energy, her unwavering authenticity, the way she had turned his world upside down. By the time the meeting ended, Kaido could barely contain himself. He loosened his tie as he stepped into the hallway, his chest tight with an emotion he could no longer deny. That evening, Kaido found himself walking the streets of Tokyo, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to see her. His restless steps led him to the modest neighborhood where Simisola lived, far from the opulence of his estate. To his surprise, She was outside, sitting on the steps of her guest house with a book in her lap. The warm glow of the streetlights illuminated her dark curls, and she looked up at him with a smile that made his heart ache. "Kaido?" she said, her voice a mix of surprise and concern. "What are you doing here?" "I don't know," he admitted, his honesty catching them both off guard. Simisola set her book aside, her brow furrowing as she stood. "Are you okay? You look tired." "I've been restless," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I can't sleep. I can't focus. He stopped himself, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Simisola took a step closer, her expression softening. "Kaito, what's wrong? You can talk to me." Her kindness, her concern, it was too much. The dam he had so carefully constructed to hold back his feelings finally broke. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice low and strained. "I told myself I could hold it in, that I could keep it to myself, but I can't. Not when every moment I'm away from you feels like a lifetime." Simisola blinked, her eyes wide with shock. "Kaido, what are you—" "I love you, Simisola," he said, the words spilling out like a flood. "I've fallen so deeply, so completely, that I don't even recognize myself anymore. You've turned my world upside down, and I don't know how to go back to the way things were. I don't want to go back." For a moment there was only silence, the weight of his confession hanging in the air between them. Kaido's heart pounded as he searched her face, terrified of what he might find there. Rejection, discomfort, anything that might confirm his worst fears. But then she smiled. "Kaido," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "you have no idea how much that means to me." He took a step closer, the distance between them shrinking until they were only inches apart. "Do you feel the same?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Simisola hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "I do," she admitted, her cheeks flushing a deep shade of pink. "But this, us, it feels impossible. You're Kaido Nakamura, heir to one of the most powerful families in Japan, and I'm just me." Kaido reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "You're not just anything, Simisola. You're everything. You're the only person who's ever made me feel alive, who's ever made me want something for myself instead of for my family. I don't care what anyone thinks. I don't care about the expectations or the rules. I care about you." Her breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes as she looked up at him. "Kaido." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender, yet firm. "Say you'll let me fight for this," he pleaded. "For us. Say you'll let me love you." The emotions swirling between them were too powerful to contain. Simisola nodded, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll let you love me." The words were all Kaido needed. Without hesitation, he leaned down, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was as intense as it was tender. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered emotion, a release of all the longing, all the restraint, all the feelings they had tried so hard to suppress. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. "This isn't going to be easy," Simisola said, her voice shaky but resolute. "Your family, your world, they're not going to accept this." "I don't care," Kaido said firmly. "As long as I have you, I'll face anything." And in that moment, under the glow of the Tokyo streetlights, their love story truly began. It was a love born of defiance, of courage, of two souls finding each other against all odds. And though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, neither of them was willing to let go. The Nakamura estate, with its sprawling gardens and imposing architecture, had always felt like a fortress to Kaito, a place of control, power, and expectation. Yet, as he stepped into his father's study that morning, the weight of the impending confrontation pressed down on him like never before. The room, lined with shelves of leather-bound books and adorned with priceless antiques, radiated authority. At the center sat Hiroshi Nakamura, his expression as cold and unyielding as the steel gray suit he wore. A man whose every word carried the weight of the empire he had built. Hiroshi was a force Kaido had spent his entire life trying not to disappoint. But this time, Kaido had no intention of backing down. The silence in the room was heavy as Hiroshi set down the letter he had been reading and folded his hands on the desk before him. His dark eyes bore into Kaido's, sharp and unrelenting. "I've been hearing things, Kaido," Hiroshi began, his tone deceptively calm. "Whispers about your distractions, about a woman." Kaido stiffened but remained composed. "Her name is Simisola James." Hiroshi's jaw tightened, his nostrils flaring ever so slightly. "An English teacher," he said, the words laced with disdain. "A foreigner, a woman who has no place in our world." "She's more than that," Kaido replied firmly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his father's gaze. "She's intelligent, compassionate, and strong. She's everything I never knew I needed." Hiroshi leaned back in his chair, his expression darkening. "Do you understand what you're saying, Kaido? You are the heir to the Nakamura Zaibatsu. Your choices are not your own. Your life is not your own. And yet, you think you can jeopardize everything for love," Kaido interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "Yes, I do." Hiroshi stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Enough!" he barked, his voice echoing through the room. "You are blinded by foolish infatuation. This, Simisola, is not suitable. Not because of her race, though that will be a factor for many, but because she is nothing. She comes from nowhere, has no family name worth mentioning, no influence, no power. She will drag you down, and with you, the Nakamura name." Kaido's fists clenched at his sides. "You don't know her," he said, his voice trembling with suppressed anger. "You've never even met her, yet you pass judgment as if she were beneath you. Simisola has more integrity, more heart, than anyone in this family." Hiroshi's expression hardened further, his voice a low growl. "If you continue down this path, Kaito, you will lose everything. Your inheritance, your position, your future. You will no longer be a Nakamura." The threat hung in the air like a blade poised to strike, but Kaido didn't flinch. He met his father's gaze with unwavering resolve. "Then so be it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "If being a Nakamura means sacrificing the one person who truly matters to me, then I don't want it." Hiroshi's fury erupted like a storm. "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" he demanded, slamming his hand on the desk. "You would throw away everything, for a woman who can offer you nothing in return?" "She offers me everything that matters," Kaido shot back, his voice rising to match his father's. "Happiness, freedom, love, things this family has never understood." Hiroshi's face twisted with anger. "You are weak," he spat, "blinded by your emotions. If you walk out of here, Kaito, you will be nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." Kaido took a deep breath, the weight of his father's words pressing against him. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, unyielding. "I would rather be nothing with her than everything without her." Later that evening, Kaido found himself standing outside Simisola's guest house, his heart heavy but resolute. When she opened the door, her concern was immediate. "Kaido, what's wrong?" she asked, stepping aside to let him in. He didn't answer right away, instead pulling her into a tight embrace. She froze for a moment, startled, before wrapping her arms around him. "Kaido," she said softly, "what happened?" He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own filled with a mixture of pain and determination. "My father knows about us," he said, "and he's furious. He wants me to end things with you. He's threatened to disown me if I don't comply." Simisola's heart sank. "Kaito, I don't want you to lose everything because of me." "I'm not losing anything," he said firmly, cupping her face in his hands. "What I found in you, Simisola, is something I never thought was possible. You've shown me a world beyond the one I've been trapped in, a life filled with meaning and joy. I won't give that up. I won't give you up." Tears welled in her eyes as she shook her head. "But Kaito, your family, your future—" "My future is with you," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "I don't care about the money or the power or the name. None of it means anything if I can't have you by my side." Simisola reached up to wipe away a tear that had slipped down his cheek. "You're willing to give up everything for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For us," he corrected, his gaze unwavering. "Because you're worth it, Simisola. You're worth everything." Her lips quivered as she smiled through her tears. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, Kaito." He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. "You don't have to do anything. Just stay with me. That's all I need." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the world outside seemed to fade away. They knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges: family resistance, societal scrutiny, the weight of expectations. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They had each other, and that was enough. For now, love was their only shield against the storm, and they were determined to fight for it, no matter the cost. The glow of Kaito's love enveloped Simisola James in a way she had never known. He was kind, attentive, and unwavering in his devotion to her. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, shadows began to creep into the edges of their happiness. Those shadows came in the form of stares that lingered too long, whispers that were barely concealed, and the polite but icy demeanor of those in Kaito's circle. At first, Simisola tried to ignore it. She told herself that it didn't matter what others thought, that the strength of their love could withstand the world's judgment. But as the small slights grew more frequent and pointed, they began to gnaw at her resolve. The first sting came at an exclusive dinner hosted by one of Kaito's business associates. The Nakamura name carried immense weight, and Kaito's presence at such events was expected. Though he had hesitated to bring Simisola, fearing how she might be treated, she insisted on coming. "I want to support you," she had said, her voice filled with determination. Kaito had smiled at her then, grateful for her strength. But that strength would soon be tested. The evening began well enough, with Kaito introducing her to a few colleagues. Yet, as the night progressed, the atmosphere shifted. One of the women, a socialite with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, turned to Simisola with feigned interest. "Your dress is lovely," she said, her tone laced with condescension. "Very exotic." Simisola forced a smile, though her grip on her champagne flute tightened. "Thank you," she replied evenly. Another guest chimed in, their tone seemingly innocent. "So, where are you from? Your English is impeccable." Simisola felt the familiar sting of the question. "I'm from New York," she said, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Oh, how interesting," the first woman said, exchanging a glance with another guest. "But your heritage? It must be quite different from ours." The implication hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Kaito, standing beside her, stiffened. He was about to speak, but Simisola placed a gentle hand on his arm, a silent plea for him to let it go. These moments became more frequent, and though Kaito's presence was a shield, it couldn't block every blow. When she wasn't with him, the isolation was even more palpable. At another event, she overheard a whispered comment from one of Hiroshi's old friends. "She's beautiful, yes, but so different. I can't imagine how she fits into the Nakamura family." Simisola pretended not to hear, but the words echoed in her mind long after. Even at smaller gatherings, the polite exclusion stung. Conversations shifted when she approached. Invitations were extended to Kaito, but not to her, and she found herself standing alone more often than not. One evening, after yet another cold reception at a business gala, Simisola sat on the edge of her bed in her modest guest house, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. Kaito had left her a dozen messages, asking how she was feeling, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. When he showed up unannounced later that night, worry etched into his features. She finally let the dam break. "Kaito, I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice cracking as tears welled in her eyes. He crossed the room in an instant, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his. "Simisola, talk to me. What's wrong?" She looked at him, her expression a mix of pain and exhaustion. "It's not just one thing, Kaito. It's everything. The stares, the comments, the way people look at me like I don't belong, like I'm not good enough for you." "That's not true," he said fiercely, his grip on her hands tightening. "You are more than good enough. You are everything to me." "But am I enough for them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your family, your associates, they'll never accept me, Kaito. And I don't want you to lose everything because of me." Kaito's heart ached at her words. He had seen her struggle, felt the weight of her pain, but hearing it laid bare was almost too much to bear. "Simisola," he said, his voice trembling, "I don't care what they think. I care about you, about us." "But it's not that simple," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You're Kaito Nakamura. Your name carries power, responsibility. If you choose me, you'll lose so much." "Then let me lose it," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't care about the money or the name. None of it matters without you." She shook her head, her tears falling freely. "You say that now, but what about in a year? 5 years? Will you still feel the same when you've been cut off from everything you've ever known?" Kaito cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "I will feel the same," he said with absolute conviction, "because what I've found in you, Simisola, is worth more than anything I could lose. You've shown me a life beyond the walls I've been trapped in. You've given me freedom, love, and joy. I won't let that go." Simisola closed her eyes, her heart warring with her mind. She wanted to believe him, to trust that their love could withstand the storm. But the weight of the world they were fighting against felt insurmountable. "I love you, Kaito," she said, her voice barely audible, "but I'm scared. I'm scared of what this will do to you, to us." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I'm scared too," he admitted, "but I'd rather face that fear with you than live a life without you." For a long moment they stayed like that, their foreheads touching, their breaths mingling in the quiet of the room. Simisola felt the strength of his love, the unyielding determination in his words. "Okay," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I'll fight for us. But you have to promise me something, Kaito." "Anything," he said without hesitation. "Promise me you'll stand up to them, that you'll fight for us too." He nodded, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I promise." As they held each other, the storm outside seemed to fade, replaced by the quiet strength of their resolve. They knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but for now, they had each other, and that was enough to keep going. But deep down, Simisola couldn't shake the lingering doubt. Love was powerful, but was it powerful enough to withstand the weight of an entire world built to keep them apart? Only time would tell. The night was unusually quiet, the Tokyo skyline a constellation of lights against the deep indigo of the sky. Simisola. James sat cross-legged on the tatami floor of her guest house, surrounded by stacks of aged documents and faded photographs. The room was dimly lit by a single desk lamp, its glow casting long shadows over the room, making the artifacts seem almost alive with the weight of history. For weeks, she had poured every spare moment into uncovering her grandmother Yumi's story. What had started as a quest to connect with her Japanese heritage had transformed into something far more personal, an exploration of identity, love, and a history that felt eerily tied to her own. Simisola's fingers trembled as she carefully unfolded a brittle letter she had discovered among the records at the Asakusa archives. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, and undoubtedly Japanese. Her eyes scanned the words, piecing together fragments of a story that sent chills down her spine. The letter was addressed to a woman named Yumi, her grandmother, and signed by none other than Takeshi Nakamura, Kaito's grandfather. Simisola's breath caught in her throat as the words unfolded like a tragic melody. Takeshi had written about his love for Yumi, a love that had defied the rigid societal expectations of post-war Japan. He spoke of stolen moments beneath the cherry blossoms, whispered promises, and the heartbreak of knowing their love could never endure in a world that refused to accept them. You are my sun and my moon, Yumi. The love I feel for you defies every rule, every expectation. But the weight of my name, the chains of my family's honor, make it impossible for us to be together. I will carry you in my heart for all my days, but I cannot ask you to bear the burden of my world. Forgive me. Tears blurred Simisola's vision as she read the final lines. Her hands shook as she clutched the letter to her chest, the weight of its words pressing down on her. Takeshi's anguish, his impossible choice, mirrored Kaito's struggle in a way that was almost unbearable. It was as if history itself had reached out to warn her of what lay ahead. The following day, Simisola shared her discovery with Kaito. They sat in her modest room, the letter spread out between them. Kaito's face was a mask of conflicting emotions as he read his grandfather's words, his jaw tightening with each line. I had no idea, he said finally, his voice heavy with disbelief. I never knew my grandfather loved someone other than my grandmother. Simisola reached for his hand, her touch grounding him. It's not just about love, Kaito. It's about what it meant for him to make that choice, to choose his family, his name, over his heart. He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a turmoil she couldn't begin to fathom. And now, it feels like I'm standing in his shoes, facing the same impossible decision. But you're not him, Simisola said firmly. You have a choice, Kaito. A chance to break the cycle, to choose love over fear. Emboldened by the discovery, Kaito decided it was time to confront his father once again. He returned to the Nakamura estate, the letter tucked safely in his jacket pocket. Hiroshi was in his study as always, surrounded by the trappings of power and control. I need to talk to you, Kaito said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Hiroshi didn't look up from his papers. If it's about that woman, Kaito, I've already said all I need to say. It's not just about her, Kaito replied, his tone sharpening. It's about you, about this family, about the lies we tell ourselves to justify what we do in the name of tradition. At that, Hiroshi raised his head, his gaze cold and unyielding. Explain yourself. Kaito placed the letter on the desk, his movements deliberate. This is a letter from grandfather to Yumi James, Simisola's grandmother. They were in love once, but he chose the family over her. He let his fear and this family's obsession with control dictate his life. Hiroshi's face darkened as he picked up the letter. His hands tightened around the fragile paper, but his expression betrayed nothing. "You think this changes anything?" he said after a long silence. "That a decades-old romance justifies your recklessness?" "It changes everything," Kaido shot back. "It proves that this family has been repeating the same mistakes for generations. Grandfather regretted his choice for the rest of his life, and I refuse to make the same one." Hiroshi stood, his voice rising. "You are not Takeshi. You are the heir to the Nakamura Zaibatsu. Your duty is to this family, to its legacy, not to your fleeting desires." Kaido's fist clenched at his sides, but his voice remained steady. "Simisola is not a fleeting desire. She's the woman I love. And if you think I'm going to sacrifice her for a legacy built on control and fear, you're wrong." While Kaido fought battles within the walls of his family estate, Simisola wrestled with her own doubts. The weight of history, the knowledge of what Takeshi and Yumi had endured, hung over her like a shadow. What if they were destined to face the same fate? She wandered through the streets of Tokyo, her thoughts a storm of uncertainty. Was their love strong enough to withstand the pressures of Kaido's world? Or were they fooling themselves, trying to rewrite a story that had already been written in heartbreak? As she stood beneath a blooming cherry blossom tree, the petals falling like snow around her, Simisola made a decision. She wouldn't let fear dictate her choices. She wouldn't let history define her future. If Kaido was willing to fight for their love, then so was she. That evening, Kaito returned to her guest house, his face weary but resolute. He told her everything, about the confrontation with his father, about the letter, about his determination to build a future with her no matter the cost. Simisola listened, her heart swelling with both love and fear. When he finished, she took his hands in hers, her gaze steady. "Kaido, if we're going to do this, we have to do it together. No matter what they throw at us, we have to stand strong." He nodded, his grip on her hands tightening. "Together," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll rewrite the story. For us. For them. For everything they couldn't have." And in that moment, beneath the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future, their love burned brighter than ever, an unyielding flame in the face of the storm. The Nakamura Zaibatsu's quarterly board meeting was a spectacle of power. Held in the sleek glass conference room atop the Nakamura Tower, it was a gathering of Japan's most influential business minds. Board members sat in polished leather chairs, their faces a mix of stern determination and quiet confidence. The agenda for the day was as precise as the Nakamura Empire itself, focused on expansion, acquisitions, and ensuring the family's dominance in an ever-evolving market. Kaito Nakamura sat at the head of the table, directly across from his father, Hiroshi Nakamura. As the presumed heir, Kaito's presence was not just expected, it was demanded. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his tie immaculate, but beneath the polished surface, he was a storm waiting to erupt. This meeting was more than just another exercise in corporate control. For Kaito, it was the moment that would determine the rest of his life. His heart raced as he mentally rehearsed the words he had decided on, words that would shatter the carefully constructed world his father had spent decades building. The meeting began as it always did, with Hiroshi commanding the room. His voice was firm, his directives absolute. The board members nodded along, their deference a testament to his authority. "We have finalized negotiations with the Kagawa Group," Hiroshi announced, his tone laced with triumph. "The merger will be celebrated with a formal engagement between Kaido and Ayumi Kogawa, solidifying our alliance." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Kaito felt every eye in the room turn to him, their expectations clear. This was the moment he had dreaded for weeks, the culmination of his father's attempts to control his future. Kaito inhaled deeply, steadying himself. The weight of the moment pressed against his chest, but beneath it all was the thought of Simisola, her smile, her strength, her unwavering belief in him. He couldn't let her down. "I'm afraid I can't agree to that, Father," Kaito said, his voice calm but firm. A ripple of shock spread through the room. Hiroshi's head snapped up, his sharp eyes narrowing as he regarded his son. "Excuse me?" he said, his tone deceptively mild. Kaito straightened in his seat, his gaze unwavering. "I will not marry Ayumi Kogawa," he declared. "I refuse to enter into a marriage of convenience to serve the family's interests." The room erupted in murmurs. Several board members exchanged stunned glances, while others whispered behind their hands. Hiroshi's expression darkened, his calm facade cracking to reveal the storm beneath. "You are speaking out of turn, Kaito," Hiroshi said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is not a request. It is a decision made for the benefit of this family and this empire." Kaito stood, his hands resting on the edge of the table as he leaned forward. "With all due respect, Father, I am not a pawn to be moved at your convenience. I will not sacrifice my happiness for the sake of business deals and alliances." Hiroshi's voice rose, his anger palpable. "You are the heir to the Nakamura Zaibatsu. Your duty is to this family, to this legacy. Without it, you are nothing." Kaito's jaw tightened, but he didn't falter. "I am more than your heir," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "I am a man, and I have the right to choose my own path. And I have already chosen." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. "I am in love with Simisola James," Kaito continued, his voice ringing with conviction. "She is the woman I want by my side, not because of her status, but because of who she is. She has shown me a world beyond the one you have built, a world filled with authenticity and love. I will not give that up." The silence that followed was deafening. Board members shifted uncomfortably, their expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. Hiroshi's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "You have no idea what you've done," Hiroshi said, his voice a low growl. "This is not just about you, Kaito. It is about the Nakamura name, our reputation, our future." Kaito met his father's gaze, unflinching. "The Nakamura name will endure," he said, "but I will not sacrifice my happiness for its sake. If that means giving up my inheritance, so be it." The meeting ended in chaos. Board members hurriedly left the room, whispering among themselves about the unprecedented defiance they had just witnessed. Hiroshi stormed out without another word, his rage simmering beneath the surface. Kaito remained behind, his chest heaving as the adrenaline began to fade. He felt a strange mix of fear and liberation, the weight of his decision settling over him. He had defied his father, jeopardized his standing, and risked everything he had ever known. But for the first time in his life, he felt free. That evening, Kaito returned to Simisola, his heart heavy but resolute. She opened the door to find him standing there, his tie loosened, his face weary but determined. "Kaito," she said, her voice filled with concern. "What happened?" "I told them," he said simply, "about us, about how much I love you." Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. What did they say?" He stepped inside, taking her hands in his. "It doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that I meant every word. I won't let them control my life anymore. I won't let them take you away from me." Tears filled her eyes as she pulled him into a tight embrace. "Kaito, you didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," he interrupted, his voice firm. "Because I can't imagine a future without you, Simisola. You are my future." As they held each other, the weight of the day began to lift. Kaito's defiance had set in motion a series of events that would undoubtedly change everything. His inheritance, his place in society, his relationship with his family. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He had chosen love, chosen Simisola, and that was a choice he would never regret. Their fight was far from over, but together they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their love, forged in the fires of defiance and sacrifice, was stronger than ever, and nothing could tear them apart. The decision weighed on Simisola James like a stone in her chest, heavy and unyielding. Every day brought a new reminder of the turmoil she had brought into Kaito Nakamura's life. The whispers, the stares, the cold disapproval of his family and associates. It all pressed down on her, a relentless tide of judgment that threatened to drown her resolve. She had seen the strain in Kaito's eyes, the way his once unshakable confidence faltered under the pressure of his father's wrath and the expectations of an empire. She loved him more than she had ever thought possible, but love alone didn't seem enough to shield him from the storm they were facing. Simisola had always been strong. Her grandmother's resilience had coursed through her veins, a constant reminder to stand tall in the face of adversity. But strength wasn't just about enduring. It was about knowing when to let go, when to step aside to protect someone you loved. And so, she made the hardest decision of her life. She would leave Japan. For weeks, Simisola quietly prepared for her departure. She had kept the decision to herself, unwilling to burden Kaito with her plans. She knew he would try to stop her, to convince her that they could weather the storm together. But this wasn't just about him. It was about what was best for both of them. One evening, she sat in her modest room, her suitcase open on the bed. The sight of it brought tears to her eyes, but she forced herself to continue packing. Every item she placed in the bag felt like a piece of her heart being torn away. Clothes, keepsakes, a photo of her and Kaito from one of their happiest days together. As she folded the last of her belongings, she glanced at her phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Kaito. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I have something special planned." Her heart ached at the sight of his name, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She typed a reply, her fingers trembling. "I'm looking forward to it," she said. It was a lie, one of the few she had ever told him. By tomorrow, she would be gone. Before leaving, Simisola wrote a letter, pouring her heart onto the page. It was the only way she could explain her decision without breaking down in front of him. "My dearest Kaito, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please understand that this was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Loving you has been the greatest joy of my life, but I can't stand to see you suffer because of me. Your family, your world, it's too much. I don't want you to lose everything you've worked so hard for. You deserve a life free from the burden of my presence, a life where you can thrive without the weight of our love pulling you down. I will always love you, Kaito. Please don't ever doubt that. But sometimes, love means letting go. Be happy, my love. For me. Yours always, Simisola." She placed the letter on the small table in her room, her tears smudging the ink as she set it down. The next morning, Kaito arrived at Simisola's guest house, a bouquet of cherry blossoms in hand. He had spent the night planning a surprise for her, a day filled with everything she loved, street markets and quiet moments just for the two of them. But when he knocked on her door, there was no answer. "Simisola," he called, his voice tinged with confusion. He knocked again, louder this time, but the silence persisted. Concern growing, he tried the handle and found the door unlocked. He stepped inside, the sight of the empty room hitting him like a blow to the chest. Her suitcase was gone. On the table, he spotted the letter. With trembling hands, he picked it up, his eyes scanning the words. As he read, his breath quickened, his vision blurring with tears. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "No, she wouldn't." The bouquet slipped from his grasp, falling to the floor as he turned and bolted out of the room. Kaido's mind raced as he sped through the streets of Tokyo, his car weaving through traffic with reckless urgency. He had to find her. She couldn't leave. Not like this. He called her phone repeatedly, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. Each unanswered ring only fueled his panic. He retraced their favorite places, stopping at the ramen shop where they had shared so many meals, the shrine where she had told him about her grandmother, the park where they had kissed under the cherry blossoms, but she was nowhere to be found. Finally, it hit him: the airport. Kaido arrived at Narita International Airport, his heart pounding as he scanned the departure board. His eyes landed on a flight to New York, scheduled to depart in 30 minutes. He sprinted through the terminal, his polished shoes pounding against the tiled floor. People turned to stare as he pushed past them, his desperation palpable. When he reached the gate, he saw her. She was standing in line to board, her shoulders tense, her head bowed. "Simisola!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of the terminal. She froze, her heart lurching at the sound of his voice. Slowly she turned, her eyes widening in shock as she saw him standing there, breathless and disheveled. "Kaito, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. He strode toward her, his emotions boiling over. "What am I doing here? What are you doing here, Simisola? Were you really going to leave without saying goodbye?" Tears filled her eyes as she looked away. "I left a letter." "A letter?" he repeated, his voice rising. "You think a letter is enough? You think you can just walk out of my life like that?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "Then don't leave," he said, his tone pleading. "Don't do this, Simisola. Don't make this choice for me. I don't care about the rest of the world. I care about you." Simisola shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Kaido, your family, your inheritance, everything you've worked for. I don't want to be the reason you lose it all." Kaido stepped closer, his hands cupping her face. "I told you before, and I'll tell you again. None of it matters without you. You are my everything, Simisola. My world, my heart, my future. If I have to lose everything to be with you, then so be it." Her resolve crumbled as she saw the sincerity in his eyes. "Kaido, He silenced her with a kiss, pouring every ounce of love and desperation into it. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Don't leave me," he whispered. "Stay. We'll face it all together. I'll fight for us, for you, for our love. Just stay." Simisola nodded, her tears mixing with her laughter as she pulled him into another embrace. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Kaido held her tightly, relief washing over him. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but in that moment, they knew they could face anything as long as they were together. The announcement for her flight echoed through the terminal, but neither of them paid it any mind. They had already chosen their destination, each other. The decision to leave the shadow of the Nakamura Empire was not an easy one for Kaido. Walking away from the life he had been groomed for since birth meant not only turning his back on his inheritance, but also severing ties with a legacy that had shaped him. Yet, standing beside Simisola, Kaido felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to build a future not dictated by duty or tradition, but by love, authenticity, and change. For Simisola, it was a leap into the unknown. Her love for Kaido had brought her to a place of immense joy and unrelenting challenges, but now they had a chance to carve out something entirely their own. A life not bound by the expectations of others, but one defined by their shared dreams. Their new life began in a small but cozy apartment in a quieter part of Tokyo, far removed from the opulence of the Nakamura estate. It was a space filled with laughter, quiet moments, and the steady hum of possibility. They decorated it together, filling it with pieces that reflected both their journeys. Japanese art hung alongside vibrant African prints, and a modest kotatsu stood near shelves of books, many of which Simisola had carried with her from home. It wasn't extravagant, but it was theirs. One evening, as they unpacked boxes, Kaito found a photograph of Simisola's grandmother, Yumi, standing beside her parents in a traditional kimono. He held it carefully, his fingers tracing the edges. "She looks so proud," Kaito said, handing the photo to Simisola. "She was," Simisola replied, a soft smile on her lips. "She taught me to always carry my heritage with pride, even when it feels like the world wants you to forget it." Kaito nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. "We'll honor her, Simisola. We'll build something that would have made her proud." Kaito's departure from the Nakamura Zaibatsu had sent shockwaves through the business world. The heir apparent walking away from one of Japan's most powerful conglomerates was unthinkable. Yet, rather than retreat into obscurity, Kaito used the scandal as a platform to speak out. In interviews, he openly criticized the rigid structures and exclusivity that had defined his family's empire. "Success should not come at the cost of humanity," he said in one particularly viral interview. "We have a responsibility to build not just wealth, but a better world." He founded a philanthropic organization, Nakamura New Dawn, dedicated to fostering inclusivity and sustainability in Japan's corporate world. The organization focused on empowering underrepresented communities, funding educational programs, and creating opportunities for young entrepreneurs. The shift wasn't easy. Kaito faced backlash from former allies and scrutiny from the media, but with Simisola by his side, he remained steadfast. One of their proudest moments came when Nakamura New Dawn launched a scholarship program for international students in honor of Yumi James and Takeshi Nakamura. The program sought to connect Japanese and African students, bridging the cultural gap and fostering mutual understanding. Simisola, too, found her calling. Inspired by her experiences navigating the complexities of identity and heritage, she founded Bridges Beyond Borders, a cultural exchange program connecting Japanese and African American communities. The initiative brought students, artists, and educators together to share their histories, traditions, and perspectives. The first event was a modest affair, a workshop held in a local community center where participants shared stories and created art inspired by their heritage. But as word spread, the program gained traction, attracting attention from educators and artists worldwide. One of the most emotional moments for Simisola came during a storytelling session where a young girl stood up and said, "For the first time, I feel like my story matters." Simisola fought back tears as she hugged the girl. "Your story always mattered," she said. "Sometimes it just takes the right space to tell it." Through the challenges of building their new lives, Kaito and Simisola's love only deepened. They became each other's anchor in the chaos, a reminder of why they had chosen this path. One evening, after a particularly long day, they sat on their balcony, a bottle of sake between them. The Tokyo skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder of the world they had left behind. "Do you ever miss it?" Simisola asked, her voice soft. "Miss what?" Kaito replied, pouring them each a small cup. "The luxury, the certainty of it all." Kaito took a sip, his gaze thoughtful. "I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss parts of it, the simplicity of doing what was expected, but I wouldn't trade this for anything. For the first time, I'm living a life I chose, with you." Simisola smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We're doing it, aren't we? Building something real." "We are," he said, his hand intertwining with hers. "And we're just getting started." Their work began to ripple outward, inspiring others to challenge the status quo. Kaito's efforts to reform the Nakamura family business from the outside prompted conversations within the company about modernizing its practices. Some younger executives even reached out, expressing their admiration for his boldness. Simasola's program grew exponentially, with partnerships forming between schools in Japan and the United States. She was invited to speak at conferences, her story becoming a beacon of resilience and hope. Together, they became a symbol of change, a couple who had defied the odds and built a life that honored both their love and their individuality. One evening, as they sat in a quiet park beneath a canopy of cherry blossoms, Kaito pulled out a small box from his pocket. Simasola gasped as he opened it to reveal a delicate ring, the diamond catching the soft glow of the lanterns around them. "I've already given up my past for you," he said, his voice steady and full of emotion. "Now, I want to give you my future. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, her smile brighter than the stars above. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times, yes. As they embraced, the cherry blossoms began to fall, their delicate petals swirling around them like a blessing. In that moment, their journey felt complete, not an end, but a new beginning. Their story was no longer about what they had left behind, but about the life they had built together, a life rooted in love, strength, and an unwavering belief in the power of change. Together, they were creating a legacy that would endure for generations, proving that love, when fought for, could truly conquer all. The cherry blossoms had bloomed and fallen countless times since Kaito Nakamura and Simasola James began their life together, yet each petal seemed to whisper their story, a tale of defiance, resilience, and love that transcended boundaries. What started as an improbable romance between two people from vastly different worlds had blossomed into a movement, inspiring countless others to challenge convention and embrace change. Word of their love story had spread far beyond the walls of their modest Tokyo apartment. News outlets and social media platforms hailed their union as a powerful statement against societal constraints, sparking conversations about race, identity, and the courage to choose love over tradition. Journalists interviewed them, intrigued by their journey. Simasola spoke with quiet strength about the challenges they had faced and the wounds they had healed together. Kaito, once the picture of stoicism, revealed the vulnerability that had fueled his transformation. Together, they stood as a united front, their love a beacon of hope in a world too often divided. At a public forum hosted by Kaito's philanthropic organization, Nakamura New Dawn, a young man stood during the Q&A session, his voice trembling with emotion. "You've shown us that love doesn't have to fit into society's expectations," he said. "Because of you, I feel brave enough to fight for the person I love, no matter what anyone says." Kaito and Simasola exchanged a glance, their hands clasping instinctively. They had not set out to become symbols, but their story had touched lives in ways they could never have imagined. As Simasola's cultural exchange program, Bridges Beyond Borders, expanded, so did her understanding of her grandmother's legacy. Through meticulous research, she pieced together fragments of Yumi's life, uncovering not just the love story between Yumi and Takeshi Nakamura, but also Yumi's own resilience in the face of rejection and loss. In one of her most poignant discoveries, Simasola found an unfinished memoir written by Yumi, tucked away in a small library in Kyoto. The pages revealed Yumi's inner turmoil, the pain of loving someone she couldn't be with, the strength it took to leave, and the hope that one day her story might inspire others. Simasola read those pages aloud to Kaito one evening, her voice trembling with emotion. She wrote, "Love is not a weakness, as they would have me believe. It is a force, as enduring and relentless as the tide. If I could pass on one thing to the generations that come after me, it would be this: do not fear love, fight for it." Kaito sat in stunned silence before pulling Simasola into his arms. "She would have been so proud of you," he said. of everything you've done, everything we've built together." Simisola nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And she would have been proud of you too, Kaido, for choosing love, even when it meant walking away from everything else." Their lives became an intricate tapestry, blending the lessons of the past with the promise of the future. Through bridges beyond borders, Simisola fostered connections between communities, using art, music, and storytelling to bridge cultural divides. Her workshops became spaces where people from different backgrounds could share their truths, finding strength in their shared humanity. Kaito, meanwhile, continued to reshape the Nakamura family's legacy from the outside. He worked tirelessly to dismantle the exclusivity that had once defined the empire, advocating for diversity and inclusivity at every level. His efforts bore fruit as the company began funding scholarships, community outreach programs, and sustainable initiatives, steps that symbolized a break from its rigid, tradition-bound past. Together, they launched a joint initiative, the Yumi and Takeshi Fellowship, named after the grandparents whose love story had paved the way for their own. The fellowship provided funding and mentorship to young leaders from marginalized communities, empowering them to create change in their own unique ways. The Nakamura family, once a source of tension and pain, slowly began to heal. Hiroshi Nakamura, though initially unrelenting in his disapproval, could not ignore the impact of Kaido and Simisola's work. He saw the admiration they garnered, the lives they changed, and the strength of their bond. One evening, Hiroshi appeared unannounced at their apartment, his stern demeanor softened by age and reflection. "I've spent my life building walls," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "Walls between myself and the world, between myself and my family. But watching you two, I see now that those walls were my greatest mistake." Kaido and Simisola exchanged a look, their hearts heavy yet hopeful. "I can't undo the past," Hiroshi continued, his gaze meeting Simisola's for the first time without judgment. "But I hope, in some small way, I can help build the future." Years later, as their children ran through the garden of their countryside home, laughter echoing through the air, Kaito and Simisola sat beneath a cherry blossom tree, watching the petals drift around them. Their eldest, a spirited girl with her father's dark eyes and her mother's radiant smile, paused to show them a flower crown she had made. "It's for you, Mama," she said, placing it gently on Simisola's head. "Thank you, my love," Simisola replied, pulling her daughter into her lap. Kaito smiled, his arm draped around Simisola's shoulders. "Do you think they'll ever understand what it took to get here?" he asked softly. Simisola leaned her head against his. "Maybe not fully," she said, "but they'll feel it. In the life we've built, in the love we've shown them, they'll know." As the sun set, casting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Kaito and Simisola held each other close, their hearts full. Their love had defied the odds, broken barriers, and rewritten the narrative that had once bound them. Their story, once fraught with pain and sacrifice, had become a legacy, a testament to the power of love to heal, transform, and endure. It was a story they would carry with them always, a flame that would burn brightly for generations to come. The end. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with your friends and loved ones.